England turned up to India with 2 kid spinners and an injured Jack Leach. They had to rely on Joe fucking Root to bowl the most overs he's ever bowled in his life. They really turned up for their first major away tour in Bazball with 4 of the most random dudes as their spinners. And before the final innings, do you know who was bowling spin in the warm-up? Ben Stokes. We saw him preparing for this during the Ashes, and we know he's been working on his off breaks a lot at practice. He will bowl offies in Test cricket. And coming into that last innings, it looked like he was preparing to break glass in case of an emergency. And considering India made 400 runs in the first knock and should have scored a lot more, it made sense. England conceded a first innings lead of 190 runs. Crickviz's win predictor had them at a 5% chance of winning. In terms of first innings deficits, England pulled off the 10th biggest comeback in the history of Tests. And many of these comebacks, they were not against a bowling attack of this quality, and certainly not on wickets with massive turn. India's home record over the last decade is just stupidly good. The gap between the next 2 best teams, New Zealand and Australia, is massive when we look at the win percentages in this time. India in the last decade have a higher win percentage than the West Indies in the 1980s and Australia from 1995 to 2005. However, some of that is from the number of draws that used to happen. But the win-loss ratio makes things a little bit more clear. West Indies went 18-1 at home in the 80s. So India was clearly not at that level. But their record at home is really similar to Australia, 95 to 2005, on both win percentage as well as win-loss ratio. And even if it wasn't as good as those 2 great teams, the fact that we are comparing them tells you a lot. And England beat India by coming from behind. And this wasn't a slug out on a Bunsen wicket like the Australian wins of Indore and Pune. Nor was it on the back of Joe Root dominating a depleted bowling lineup at Chennai. This is a comeback against an all-time great home team on a wicket that had way more than above average turn, even by Indian standards. England really did something special here. But what role did Bazball play in England's great heist against India? So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. Do you know one thing that wasn't really all that Bazball? Ben Stokes' first innings knock. He was the only batter who could kick on after getting a start for England. And once again, it wasn't a normal innings, but it was a normal Ben Stokes innings. His ability to shift through the gears, or maybe skip from going from the first gear to the 5th, within the same innings is well documented. But the way he played was not particularly Bazball, it was just Ben Stokes. But England's innings actually did start with some Bazballness. They went after the Indian seamers early on, scoring 41 runs off the first 8 overs. And we all expected this because it made the most sense. It's what the England batters are best at. But India's spin attack really managed to slow things down. However, this allowed them to start against spin with a small cushion. This was very Bazball. But the innings itself really wasn't. England were very timid against the spinners. There was very little counter-attack, even if they tried some mild, unconventional ideas. So they ended up under par. But that is not what England said. This was the most Bazballian thing about England in that innings. Certainly far more than Ben Stokes' innings, which was just a batter blocking for a while and then slogging with the tail, which is kind of normal. And the thing is, England were very clearly not above par. There were plenty more runs that could have been scored on this pitch, as the next 2 innings, and even India's chase, suggested. India's first knock went well beyond any total that England thought was par. And Jaiswal's knock was pretty similar to the Bazball philosophy. He looked to attack everyone and keep them off kilter. But when you look at the dismissals of all the Indian batters, this wasn't because England bowled well. Although England did claim to bowl well, because Bazball. Rohit stepped out before the ball was even bowled, which allowed Leach to drop it a little bit shorter. Look at Jaiswal's bat face. He was so keen to attack Root that he made an error. Gill got out on a half volley on leg stump, perhaps committing to an attacking shot a little bit too early after getting a little stuck. Shreyas did not quite connect with the wrong end, but there were so many worse balls coming all the time for him to punish, he didn't need to play this. KR got out to a Rayan Ahmed long hop that, to be fair, he tried to deposit into the stands and didn't quite get it. And Ashwin was run out in comical fashion when Jadeja did not trust his call. That also triggered a tail collapse. This meant that India didn't bat England completely out of the game, although they gave it a good chance. Rahul Dravid said that they were about 70 runs short.
In fact, if anything, I thought we left probably 70 runs on the board in the first innings.
And there is no universe where scoring over 400 is bad when you get a 190 lead. But against this attack, on that wicket, with so many batters getting set, India should have scored a minimum of 480 and maybe really 550. But in the third innings, England turned up the Bazball settings, even taking on the spinners early. My friend called it shellfish batting, as they were creating some of the weirdest shapes ever in trying to sweep and reverse sweep almost every ball. It got England off to a flyer, but that actually wasn't the important part. It was that they completely upset India's spin bowling triumvirate. They just couldn't work out what to do. And before this test, Ashwin said that he hadn't thought much about what to do if England attacked him. That was probably him being a little bit coy, but it also looked really true. None of Crawley, Duckett and Pope have played spin well on Asian pitches before. And two of them got a really good start and the other one went massive. That is a huge win for Bazball. In fact, if it was not for Bumrah's spell, Pope could have been batting with the specialist at the end of the third day. And what about him? His third innings masterclass will go down as probably one of the greatest test hundreds by an English batter on Indian wickets, and maybe even all of Asia. And he certainly used the Bazball energy to corrupt India's plans against him. He played a lot of reverse sweeps. Not all of them good. In fact, some of them were absolutely terrible. Like for most of the day, he was scoring at less than a run a ball from it. Whereas all the top order players on Indian wickets usually strike at 156 when playing it. And he would end up with a strike rate of 115, which is still very low for a reverse sweep. But it wasn't about the runs he got from it, but how many times he actually played it. Because there's no way India would have assumed he was going to do it this much, and it completely upset their plans. In that innings, he played 23. That's 6 more than he played in his entire career before Brendan McCullum took over as coach. India had a plan, and Pope reversed it. Hell, he was pulling out dill scoops to use the quick spinner's speed against them. It is hard to plan for chaos. And he became the visiting batter with the second highest individual score of the third innings of an Indian test match this century. Yes, that sounds like a little bit of a contrived stat, but the point is that Brendan McCullum is the person with the high score at the very same ground. What about their treatment of Tom Hartley, who had an absolutely terrible start to his test career with the ball? Never had he taken the new pill in a first-class match, and the first time he did, Jaiswal welcomed him with a 6. He looked like he was trying to hit him back to obscurity. Yet Hartley returned with figures of 2 for 131 in 25 overs. He was flattered by those numbers. But in the next innings, he joined James Langridge and Jim Laker in an elite club of English spinners with 7 wickets on their debut. And after the historic win, what did Hartley talk about? But how the captain coach showed him a lot of belief. And part of that was because England chose Hartley over Moriarty or Dawson because they were not looking for experience or form, but skill sets that would work. Now, clearly they asked too much of him in the first innings. But again, that Kool-Aid confidence that this team gives people allowed Hartley to just laugh it off. Compare that to Simon Kerrigan, who was a better bowler than Hartley when he made his England debut. But when he struggled at the Oval against the Australians, England cricket seemed unable to give him any confidence. And at that point, England players and coaches were more obsessed about whether the player was of international quality. So they missed out on a decent backup spinner by looking at his weaknesses and not pumping him up. With Hartley, they focused on what he might be able to do. And he did it. And England aren't silly. They know players like him and Crawley. So all they are trying to do is maximize their impact so that their overall stats don't matter as much. Now remember that we talked about Rahul Dravid saying that India was 70 short after the first innings. Well, that's not just hindsight talking. We have seen this over the years, that batting in India becomes a lot tougher after each innings. Compare this to England, where the first 3 innings are basically the same, and then the wicket gets a little bit worse at the end, and it gets slightly tricky. India starts incredible for batting, and every time a team steps out to start their innings, it gets a little bit tougher. You are not supposed to chase targets in India. The highest successful chase in the last 10 years was 147. That was Afghanistan versus Ireland in 2019. India have never had to chase over 115 when they've batted last. And in many games, India only had to bat once anyway. And remember, they did have that chance here. But 3 of India's 4 losses in this time period have come while chasing targets. Pune in 2017, Chennai in 2021, and then this match. They are not used to it, it is really tough, and this one was way bigger than usual. You add in the lack of 2 stars, Rishabh Pant and Virat Kohli, and then also the lack of experience in Ajinkya Rahane and Cheteshwar Pujara, and this was always going to be difficult. It may seem weird, but to end this close is actually a pretty good effort, even if the tail did flatter the final run line a little bit. But again, this was not really a Bazball bowling innings from England. Perhaps the silly point, which is a throwback to the pre-DRS era, was something of a funky field. But actually, Stokes gave his spinners a lot more fielding support in the second innings, which is the way smarter move. He also stole a wicket in a way that he was much more known for before his knees ate their own cartilage. His display of aging athleticism to dismiss Jadeja, a brilliant fielder himself, was quite special. He dived and lost his balance, yet managed to get a direct hit at the bowler's end. That ended India's last pair at the top. On a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is Brendan McCullum diving over a boundary into a fence to stop 1 extra run, this was probably like a 5 on the Bazball scale. India certainly played their part with the bat, probably twice. And the softball and slowing wicket helped England in that third innings. Not to mention that Stokes' knock and the run out were also more classical cricket. But I think this makes it even more impressive. They didn't just light themselves on fire and try and outrun India. They used their new tactics when they had to get the best out of themselves. And now this is an incredible win. But India should be more ready for this next time. And it does feel that when teams actually plan for Bazball, they are in a much better situation against it. Pretending you can just play the same way is actually what gets you into trouble against England. However, a couple of interesting things about India too. Like they have lost 4 times this decade at home, but 3 of those are in the first test of a series. It seems like sometimes they just need to be woken up a little bit. But perhaps though, teams are playing slightly better against India at the moment, as they are shockingly winless at home in their last 3 matches. And if you think that is a small positive that doesn't mean much, then you haven't spent time with Ben Stokes and the Bazball crew. They take the smallest positives and they snort them before entering the field. One thing we have noticed about Bazball is that they don't need it to be true. They just need to think it might be. They just need to believe it is. And a week ago, the truth was that they might not win a test in India. And Ben Stokes just took a ragtag bunch of misfit spinners and top order dudes and pulled off one of cricket's greatest heists. A lot of people complain that I'm not a former cricketer and so that I don't really know the game. Well, you know what they can't claim? That I don't know desks. I've been using desks for years. I'm a collector of desks, old and new, and I'm sitting on a new one right now. I'm the Don Bradman of sitting at desks. So when I tell you that the E7 Pro next generation height adjustable desk from FlexiSpot is legit, this is like Michael Jordan talking to you about sneakers. This desk holds 160 kilograms. It is as stable as anything I've ever seen, and it has under-desk cable management. But really, the main skill here is that this desk rises and falls at the push of a button, and it moves super quick. And it has so many settings that remember your favorite heights. It really does it all. And I could not recommend the E7 Pro from FlexiSpot anymore, even though I am currently sitting on one of FlexiSpot's BS12 Pro multifunctional, adjustable, upgraded fabric, ergonomic chairs. My butt and computer have never been happier than when using one of FlexiSpot's products. So get over to their page right now for big savings.